forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
And greetings. Welcome to another episode here of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Dace. He's Aaron McIntyre, and we are underway in what is a big week of Big Ten action. Aaron, you ready to go?
Absolutely.
Then let's get to it. Let's get to the Big Five on Bigger Ten. Let us begin with James Franklin and Penn State. So 6 weeks ago, Penn State was number 5 in the country, riding, a 9-game winning streak. Talk of college football after that win over Auburn at the Whiteout. Since then, they have lost 4 of their last 5. He's now 10-9 in his last 19 games. Penn State is unranked and completely out of the division race heading into the final 2 weeks of the regular season. It just kind of seems to me, Aaron, that if his name were Jim Harbaugh, there'd be a lot bigger talk about this in the media. So why isn't there? And is it just as simple as their starting quarterback got hurt against Iowa and just is a shell of himself because he can't run a lot with those bad ribs? Is it just that simple, or is there something else going on here?
No, because this has been a contention. I mean, there have been a few years now, a few seasons where this talk has gone on where, he doesn't really have that great of a road record against ranked teams, doesn't have a really great record against those in the top 5. He is Jim Harbaugh with one more win over Ohio State. Is that the number of times he's beaten Ohio State?
One time. They blocked a kick in a whiteout in the rain. That's their one win against Ohio State. Yes.
So I think it's hard to say. One, there is just the geographical that we talked about before. Happy Valley is kind of out there in a college football island. They're still a big powerhouse. They still make a lot of news, but still they're just kind of out there as well. Also, I think the psychology, the media psychology comes into play here. The sports media loves to build people up only then to tear them down for whatever reason. Same thing happened with Jim Harbaugh. Now, he was an easy target in his first couple of seasons at Michigan because he was saying all sorts of crazy, bombastic things and to some extent backing them up on the field. And then when he couldn't beat Ohio State, now suddenly he's the heel all the time. James Franklin has been, other than the 1-0 thing every single week on Twitter, there's not as much of that. He's more of a consistent person. I should say more of a consistent in terms of his outward appearance to the public. So there's not as much to maybe grab a soundbite here and there and run with that. Also, I just think he's a smaller persona than Jim Harbaugh. But we're talking about some of the same stakes here. You still have to beat Ohio State to win that division on a year in and year out basis. He, by and large, except for that one time, has not done that. And so I think he is able to fly under the radar quite a bit. And I think that's really all there is to say. I mean, I think the media, the sports media, kind of already has their heel in Jim Harbaugh in that division, and they don't really need another one. So I think that's pretty much, I don't know, from my opinion, that's kind of open and shut there.
Let's move beyond the Clifford situation of this year and look at some things that are a little bit more systemic. He's lost 9 straight against top 10 ranked teams, 9 in a row. And hey, you don't. Very few coaches have winning records against top 10 teams, okay? But 9 losses in a row is not good. Furthermore, he is on his 4th offensive coordinator in the last 5 years. Thoughts on those two trend lines?
Yeah, the whole James Franklin with Joe Moorhead versus without.
Right.
That's a real thing, you'd think. That's a real thing. I know people don't like to talk about Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley as if they were they weren't super highly rated. Yeah, that's for sure. Once they got there, goodness gracious, who gets credit for that though? So this is a guy who can clearly coach. If you're not going to say that Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley were these huge, big-time recruits, then how did they get to where they were? Okay, I think there's some element of that program that James Franklin has in Happy that was good. That was better than good. But I think the turmoil in his coordinator positions, for whatever reason, that's got to be a factor here as well. And if he's not going to be able to find a coordinator, an offensive coordinator specifically, that can actually help his offense in whatever ways. I mean, they've, Clifford injury, yes, that's a big deal. But just being able to get the ball to their playmakers in space on a consistent basis, that's what they did so well with Saquon Barkley. Then I'm not really sure where else you go here if you're Penn State.
Penn State has not won a game this year when Jahan Dotson has not scored a touchdown, by the way. So you would think a program that recruits at the level of Penn State would not rely on one singular player to that degree, especially at a wide receiver position. All right, let's move on, and let's go to teams in the East that actually do matter now. One of the favorite battle cries of Ohio State fans, we don't give a damn about the whole state of Michigan, right? Well, the next 2 weeks, the road to Indianapolis for the Ohio State Buckeyes goes through the state of Michigan. The Buckeyes begin with Michigan State this Saturday. It's the largest point spread amongst two teams ranked in the top 7 since 2013, and it's only the second time ever we've had a 3-touchdown point spread between two teams ranked in the top 7. Nevertheless, though, if you look at Ohio State this year and you look at the teams they have struggled with defensively, they all have something in common. These are all teams that run the ball very well. And can Michigan State do that?
A little bit.
A little bit. They got a guy that can run the ball a little bit. Now, on the other hand, we have 130 teams that play college football. What is Michigan State's pass defense ranked? Buck 30. Dead last in all of college football. Every FBS quarterback but one that Michigan State has played this year until Talia Tagovailoa last week had set their personal high in passing yards. And the lone exception was a guy at Western Kentucky who threw for 400 yards against somebody else a little bit later on in the season. They got a couple good wide receivers over there at Ohio State.
A couple. Yeah.
Couple good ones, like 7 of them. So this looks to me like a dead nuts over game. Weather, very low winds, temps in the 40s, early kickoff. I think defense may be optional in this game. I don't think Sparty can get enough stops to win. But looking at that spread, I just think there's too much balance on that Michigan State offense that even if Ohio State gets off to the kind of start they did against Purdue, Purdue came back and did put up 30 first downs on that defense. All right. And that was one-dimensionally. You're going to have to play the run the entire game against Michigan State with Kenneth Walker there. So this is a big game for Ohio State. And then, of course, next week they have the game, and the early line on that one is they're about a 6-point favorite over Michigan and Ann Arbor. Those two have not played now in 2 years because of COVID a year ago, canceling the game. So your thoughts on Ohio State and their end game running through the state of Michigan?
So I know this sounds a little odd. I watched most of the Ohio State-Nebraska game a few weeks ago. I actually thought that was the best Ohio State, at the very least on the defensive line. I thought that was the best they looked. They got Adrian Martinez in his face pretty quickly, pretty consistently throughout that entire game, which is why I decided pretty early on, no matter what the point spread was against Purdue, I was taking Ohio State when they came to town. And I ended up just playing, I think, minus 12.5 in the first half for a pretty good sum of money, and that cashed pretty quickly as well. So I think Ohio State is making some progress. I think my consistent criticism the entire year is their trench play, particularly on the defensive side. I think you saw that come to the fore, though, against Purdue. That's what you have to do against the quick passing attacks. Get quick pressure as well, get in that quarterback's face as soon as you possibly can. You saw teams like Michigan State and Iowa failed to do that on a consistent basis, or in Iowa's case, at all, and they struggled against Purdue. And so I think Ohio State is making some strides there. I do agree, though, their defense as a whole, not super impressive. Not super impressive, at least when compared to the other teams that they're ranked next to in the college football playoff poll, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But if I'm an Ohio State fan, obviously the offense is clicking really well now, and I think the defense is starting to come along just a little bit, at least a little bit more than it was earlier in the season, which if you're gonna maintain this trajectory, go into the college football playoff again, you better hope that defense starts to click.
Let's go over to the West. There was so much talk about Purdue, Minnesota, and yet here we are going into the final 2 weeks, and it's down to the same two teams that literally everybody in the universe predicted to be first and second in some order in the Big Ten West. It's down to Wisconsin and Iowa. The Badgers control their own destiny, but they close with a game the Big Ten would like to be a rivalry game, but it isn't yet, and that's Nebraska this week. And then a game that is maybe the oldest rivalry in the Big Ten against Minnesota on rivalry weekend. Iowa plays Illinois minus Brett Bielema, who despite being fully vaccinated and boosted, still tested positive for COVID and won't coach this weekend against his alma mater. So Illinois will go to Iowa, classic sandwich game spot for the Hawkeyes, and then they go on the road to Nebraska the day after Thanksgiving. And speaking of the Huskers here, I am also fascinated to see how they will respond to the news of Scott Frost's retention. The trend line we've seen, this is the first time in the history of college football, Aaron, that we have had in-season firings at this rate, because we don't typically see it. Because it's kind of considered unseemly. But what we've seen the first few years with this early signing period in recruiting is the teams that made a coaching change just got destroyed with that recruiting class and struggled to catch back up. So this year, ADs have decided, let's fire the guy in the middle of the year. That way we can be ready to hire a coach when the season ends as soon as possible to try to salvage the last 2 weeks of that recruiting class. And so we've had 12 coaches have been fired this year in season. One of them, though, was not Scott Frost. Trev Alberts, the new AD, announced last week Frost will be retained, but now then they come off a bye. So this is a young team. A lot of these guys for Nebraska will be back next year. Will they rally around Frost here in these two spots against Wisconsin and Iowa? Because that could have a huge say in who ends up winning the Big Ten West.
I've been adamant that basically from the beginning of the year, that loss to Illinois to start things off, I've been adamant. I didn't think Scott Frost had any chance of being back. I even think I stipulated at one point that he would be fired in mid-season, or at least there could be a possibility. There was that thing with the NCAA investigation and violations at the beginning of the year. Trevor Alberts had that in his back pocket had he needed to. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. I'll just be honest. I don't really know what to make of this extension or just assurance that Scott Frost will be back next season. Maybe the brass at Nebraska see, what, we're this close in so many games. Let's just give it one more go around. Let's not blow it up super quickly here. Maybe that's what they see, or maybe it's just like, who wants to coach at Nebraska? That might be another factor here as well. So I think regardless of what happens, we've seen Nebraska, they've played at a higher level than you would expect a team of that record to have.
Or you would expect the team with that plays at that level to have a better record.
One way or the other, whichever comes first. So I don't know. As an Iowa fan, hopefully they rally at least this week, but not next week. I've been pretty consistent, and I was pretty consistent back when Iowa was still undefeated. I thought we'd either drop a game in Madison or drop a game in Lincoln. Now that we have two losses, I still think that Iowa should lose at Lincoln, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. It could be one smooth stone type of thing, or whatever whatever metaphor you want to use is. But I'm not really sure what the read is here, because apparently I've had this all wrong the entire season.
Couple anecdotes I want to show the audience on Iowa and Wisconsin. Let's start with Iowa. Minnesota was plus 130 in yards, had about twice as many first downs, won the turnover battle, had the ball for twice as long as Iowa, and still lost. If I'm a Minnesota fan, I have to stop and think, we are literally never getting that bronze pig back again. I mean, if you cannot win that game, I mean, typically the only way you lose a game with those kinds of numbers is if you lose the turnover battle. They won that too, Aaron, and still lost the game. They may never win a game in this rivalry against Iowa ever again.
They're overdue for it. You know, they're definitely overdue for it. I said that a few weeks ago. I thought, there's a little chance. I'm not really sure what the deal is with Minnesota either. This is a theme this week with Aaron. Not really sure what's going on in the West right now. I will just say with Minnesota, though, it seems like their offensive scheme is built not really to take on the Iowas of the world, at least defensively. Because Minnesota likes to run the ball, obviously, and then whatever they're doing with their passing game, it hasn't worked against Iowa. It really has not worked against Iowa now for however many years that PJ Fleck has been up there. I think with Minnesota, maybe it's in between the ears. It's one of those weird things, but Iowa has just basically had their number. This reminds me. Yeah. It reminds me a lot of years that Iowa thinks it can march into Evanston or bring Northwestern to their place and just walk right over them. And, Iowa plays a game. You would think that they should win those games. And then just in the crucial moments, nope, Northwestern. I just don't know what it's going to take for Minnesota to beat Iowa at this point, because it's been since 2014 was their last. That was the first Iowa game that I had ever attended. I think Minnesota beat Iowa 55-14 or something like that. And ever since then, Iowa has just had their number. So it's one of those weird fluky things. You would not expect it in a rivalry like this. Who hates Iowa? We hate Iowa. Well, you're not beating Iowa, and that's really all I care about.
Let's get this quick anecdote in on the Badgers here. Look at this stat. Wisconsin allowed 38 points to Michigan. I want to thank listener Zach Darrow for sharing this with us. Wisconsin allowed 38 points to Michigan. Since then, they've allowed 44 points total. That's a crazy stat, brother.
Yeah, I mean, the defense that they're playing is really good. The offenses outside of, you could say, Purdue, but Purdue was able to, I think Purdue probably put up the majority of those points against Wisconsin. The offenses they played are not super great, but then again, you could say Michigan's offense is not an elite level offense either. So that bodes well for Wisconsin. I still hang my hat on this though. You're still not going to be able to hide that quarterback forever. Now, that forever might come in Indianapolis. If you make it to Indianapolis, heck, that's a pretty good season, even if you hid your quarterback for half of it or the final third of the season. But eventually, if they want to have any goals higher than that, it's not going to be great.
Let's take a look at the latest college football playoff rankings. Top 6 in the exact, actually top 7 in the exact same order they were in last week. And there you see the 3 offerings from the Big Ten: Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State. Michigan should not be rated ahead against Ohio State or Michigan State, but it doesn't matter because these 3 teams are all playing each other the next couple of weeks, and so it will sort itself out there on the field. Wisconsin moves into the top 15. The Hawkeyes move up to 17, and those are the 5 Big Ten teams that are in the poll this week. Anything stand out to you from what's kind of otherwise a chalky week, very similar to the rankings we saw a week ago?
So are you waiting to buy your plane tickets to Pasadena and your hotel after this weekend or the next weekend?
I got to tell you, so if we lose to Ohio State, provided Michigan State loses on Saturday, we will be the Rose Bowl team. We'll be the highest rated Big Ten team, not called Ohio State, who will then be in the playoff. And my son and I are anxious to go to the Rose Bowl because we're going if Michigan makes it. Michigan hasn't been there in 15 years. Might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me to take my son. But wouldn't it be funny if the one time I'm available to go to the Rose Bowl and can make it work is the one time that Michigan actually beats Ohio State and gets to the playoff and doesn't go to the Rose Bowl?
Playoff might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, too.
Or no time in a lifetime opportunity if you're a Michigan fan. But yeah, I hear you. All right, one final thing I want to show you. This is yards per play. And this is one of the key metrics in power rating teams. And I like to do it with differential because you can be great on one side of the ball and suck on the other. All right. And so I don't include games you played against FCS scrubs. And so this is how every team in the Big Ten through 10 games this year, not counting FCS games, where they stand. And so what it means is every time the ball is snapped in an Ohio State game, whether they have the ball or not, they gain 3.1 yards. Because that's how much better they are offensively than their opponents. So that means for Rutgers, for example, every time they snap a ball in a football game, they lose 1.7 yards, and yet they're one win away from bowl eligibility. Which brings me to a point I want to make looking at these numbers. Two coaches stand out to me right away. Number one, the aforementioned Greg Schiano in Rutgers, you see how good of a coach he is, at least at Rutgers, that he knows the formula there. He knows how to win there. That they are one game away from bowl eligibility, Aaron, and they are dead last with a bullet in yards per play differential, okay? But then you see who's fourth in the league, and that's Scott Frost in Nebraska. They're plus 1.5, and they might be looking at a 3-9 season. So when we talk about how do we quantify coaching, how do we quantify game management and game day coaching, what does it look like? Well, this is what it looks like. Rutgers is dead last in yards per play differential, and it's one win away from a bowl game, folks, when this was the worst program in college football 3 years ago. And then you look at Nebraska with a top 4 yards per play, better than Michigan State, Penn State, Iowa, Minnesota. And they could be staring down the barrel of a 3-9 season under Scott Frost. That, to me, that contrast, that's what coaching means, or sometimes in Scott Frost's case, doesn't mean.
Yeah, so my brother is a pilot, and I've been working on my pilot's license for so long now, and I need to finish that up. But he's a commercial pilot. He flies a Pilatus. And it's a smaller commercial aircraft. I think it seats maybe 12 to 15 passengers, something like that. And it's one thing. It's one thing to be able to have that nice, shiny, fast aircraft, be able to taxi it, be able to take it off. Once you get it off in the air and the whole time you're on the ground and in airspace, controlled airspace, knowing what to say to the air traffic control. It's one thing to do that, knowing how to run the autopilot, knowing how to take the autopilot off. Those are really complicated things that very few people can do because it requires such a great deal of training. Once you get it up in the air, that's an accomplishment. It really is. None of that matters if you can't land the plane, though.
Yes.
This is what we're talking about here. Because Kirk Ferentz, he's great. He can develop players. The Wisconsin entire culture is great. They can develop players. They go out there. They look nice on the field. They beat their opponents. And in the close games, though, are they able to land the plane? In Wisconsin's case, yeah, more often than not. In Iowa's case, yeah, more often than not, unless they're playing Wisconsin. In the other teams that you mentioned, case, Nebraska, nice, shiny airplane. You figured out how to take it off. You figured out how to communicate well. You got it up in the air.
Yep.
But you can't land a plane ever. Now, in the case of Rutgers, though, they're flying the frickin' Wright brothers plane with a minus 1.7 yards per play differential. They're flying the Wright brothers plane. There is no radio. There is no autopilot.
Pushing that thing off a cliff.
They're pushing that thing off a cliff,
yeah.
and they're able to land it, which is why they're one game away from bowl eligibility. and Nebraska is not. That's really what we're talking about here. A lot of these coaches, they can take the plane off, they can fly it really well, they know how to do that, but when it's time to land the plane, they keep on crashing. That's not a good thing.
That's a great analogy. Well done. We'll come back, play our weekly game of Would You Rather here on Bigger 10 next. All right, time for Would You Rather here on Bigger 10. And Aaron, I begin with you. Would you rather bet Michigan State on the money line at Ohio State or Nebraska on the money line at Wisconsin this weekend?
I think I would rather bet Michigan State on the money line just because of the defenses that we're talking about here. I think Michigan State probably has a better shot against at putting up points against Ohio State's defense than Nebraska's offense does against Wisconsin's defense. I will say, though, the teams who have had the most success against Wisconsin's defense this year so far have taken consistent shots down the field and have been able to make a couple of those shots.
Because you can't run the ball against Wisconsin at all.
Precisely. So opening that up, softening up the defense in the intermediate routes, I think that's kind of the strategy there.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Nebraska has an outside shot, at least I hope they do, as an Iowa fan, but I would rather, if I'm going to put money, if I had $100 that I had to put on either one of those teams, I would go Michigan State.
Okay.
This one's for you. If you're James Franklin, would you rather stay at Penn State for another year or bolt to a worse job like Virginia Tech?
This is a tough call. He's got maybe the best recruiting class he has ever landed at Penn State coming in. Now, that's if he can hold on to these guys with the season they're having, right? I mean, we are talking about a guy that a month ago, Bruce Feldman said he was the number one candidate at both USC and LSU. Now he couldn't get that job at either one of those places. You're not hiring a guy that was 7-5 or 6-6 at his current job. You're not doing that. So I think Virginia Tech's an underrated job. It's in a very fertile recruiting region. It's in a conference. Assuming Clemson is having a one-off and they are still 7-3, we're acting like they're going to go 3-9. This might be a 9-3 team at the end of the year. Hell, they actually could still win the ACC actually. But assuming this is a one-off for Clemson. Who can you say right now is the number 2 program in the ACC? Who is it?
I don't know.
No one knows. No one really knows.
Should be Florida State.
No one really knows. Meanwhile, we could come up with like 4 legit names of who's the number 2 program in the Big Ten, right? You see where I'm going with that? I mean, to me, Penn State's a better job just lining it up next to Virginia Tech when you look at tradition, resources, history, conference, etc. But when you look at situation, if you're James Franklin, there might be more upward mobility at Penn State than at Virginia Tech. You saw, Frank Beamer had Virginia Tech in a national championship game. The last time we won a major bowl, it was in the Sugar Bowl. Our opponent was Virginia Tech. So he showed that there was enough of a recruiting base there in that area that you could turn them into a national phenomenon. So do you get out now while it's getting good? If I'm Franklin, my family's settled there, I've got that recruiting class coming in, I probably ride it out. But, I don't think he's on the hot seat right now. But I mean, if they go 7-5 next year, yeah, he's on the hot seat. And so that's what you're gauging, right? Do I get out now ahead of the posse, or do I have a team that can, hold the posse at bay and get me to 9 or 10 wins a year from now? My guess is he probably thinks it's the latter. Not to mention the buyout at Penn State's probably pretty cool. Aaron, would you rather vote Greg Schiano or Jim Harbaugh, Big Ten Coach of the Year, if Mel Tucker weren't an option?
I would vote for Greg Schiano. Now, that's not taking away, Jim Harbaugh, the job that he's done this year. I texted you on Saturday that win for Michigan is just wanted it more. I know that's a terrible cliche, but it really looked like the Michigan players just wanted to win that game more than Penn State did, and I have not seen a Michigan football game, and I watch a lot of them, where that's been the case. However, we're talking about Rutgers here. We're still talking about Rutgers could be going to a bowl game. Rutgers is responsible for getting Kansas all alone is probably the worst Power 5 football team in America. Whereas 3 years ago, it was worst A and worst B with Kansas and Rutgers there. So you gotta go Greg Schiano.
And there's other guys. I mean, Jeff Braun was on the hot seat coming in. They might be going 8-4. There's a couple of other guys who could have thrown in there too. Yeah.
This one's really, really, really random. By March, which number will be higher? Northwestern football's points per game, currently around 17, or Northwestern basketball's wins?
This is a great prop. Could you imagine this being a prop bet that you get down on?
Mm-hmm. I tried to find Northwestern's team total, team win total. Those are really hard to find. I don't even know now if they put them out.
I've never seen them for basketball teams before.
I think they do for some of the top programs, but
wow. Because I do think Northwestern basketball will be better. Not sure how it could be worse after the last couple of years. They've clearly kind of bottomed out after they finally got that NCAA tournament monkey off the back. 17, though, is a big number, particularly in our league. I will go with the 17 points per game, but I think this is really close. Like, to me, this is probably the points per game, but it's probably like minus 150, minus 180. Like, this isn't a plus 200 or plus 300 bet if you go the other way. That's a pretty close prop. I like it. That's good stuff. Also depressing if you're a Northwestern fan, but there's not too many of those. So don't worry about it. We'll come back and wrap things up with our feedback of the week and our Twitter poll next. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, who will Ohio State play in the Big Ten championship game 3 weeks from now? 74.8% of you said the Badgers of Wisconsin. 17% said Iowa. Only 8.2% of you said Buckeyes won't make it. I didn't vote that, by the way. Okay.
I did.
You did? Okay. All right. So, but for those of you that are in that 8.2% that voted the Buckeyes won't make it, here's my message to you. Appreciate you. I'm feeling you. Thank you. All right, let's get to our feedback of the week from Chris Bright, who says Ohio State, you want to talk about a stat? Look at this stat. So we had that crazy stat on Wisconsin's defense earlier, right?
Yep.
Look at this. Ohio State has scored 335 points in 7 conference games. Indiana, Northwestern, Illinois, and Rutgers have scored a combined total of 373. Wrap your head around that if you can. Yowza. Well, you look at it. Indiana's had horrible quarterback injuries. Northwestern has horrible quarterbacks. Who is the other team on there? Illinois has had to go with Arthur Sitkowski most of the year. Meanwhile, Ohio State, its third-string quarterback, Quinn Ewers, was the number 1 quarterback recruit in the country until he chose to move up a year. That could have something to do with that stat. Aaron, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, generally speaking, when you have Chris Olave and 4- and 5-star athletes on your team, and you're comparing them to teams that do not have Chris Olave and 4 and 5
and a fourth-string quarterback
and and fourth-string quarterbacks. Generally speaking, you can find some pretty stark differences. I don't want to speak in great broad sweeping statements, but generally, when you're a blue blood and you're comparing yourself to some bottom dwellers like that, generally you can find some pretty striking comparisons. But I don't know. I don't know why that is. I mean, I don't know. It's pretty crazy. Just a statistical phenomenon there, Steve.
But it is a pretty striking one.
Yeah.
It is. No doubt about it. All right, that'll wrap it up for this week here on Bigger Ten. Yes, we will have an episode next week. How could we not? We're heading into Rivalry Week, so you'll have that even though we have a short week with obviously Thanksgiving coming up. Don't forget to like us on, follow us, I should say, on Twitter at Bigger10, and to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, all that stuff you get to do on YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher, etc. Please help us to find more Big Ten sports fans just like you. And for Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you next week right here on Bigger 10.